The Maya were a successful race of people who occupied much of Central America from 1500 BC to about 800 AD, their golden age or classical period being during the first millennium of the modern era. They occupied all of the Yucatan Peninsula, which juts out into the Caribbean Sea from Central America. Modern-day tourists to Cancun and other centers of the northern Mexican part of the Yucatan Peninsula are familiar with some of the remains of the great ancient Mayan cities like Chichen Itza, but here we find ourselves in the country of Belize, midway down the east coast of the Yucatan, a less well-known part of the Mayan world. The great days of the Mayan civilization died away in about the 10th century AD, here in Belize as well as elsewhere in Central America. Present-day Belize is a curiosity in Central America, in that it's the only country there that has a British heritage and where the official language is English. The Spanish conquerors had little success here except in the coastal areas, and that did not last for long. By the middle of the 17th century, the Spanish had been discouraged and driven away by English and Scottish pirates, who sanitized their profession by calling themselves buccaneers, who then used safe shore bases to prey upon Spanish shipping. For the next decades, the English and Spanish fought each other for supremacy here. Next came a wave of British, mainly Scots, lumbermen who plundered the forests for the valuable mahogany stands there. Gradually, this part of the world was assimilated into the increasingly powerful British Empire and became known as British Honduras, with a British governor and largely ruled from London. By the mid-part of the 20th century, the people of British Honduras were chafing against their British colonial rulers. Internal political leaders and parties began to demand more autonomy, and eventually Home Rule was achieved. However, full independence from Britain was not attained until September 1981, when the country became known once again as Belize. All was not free and clear, however, as there were, and still are, territorial claims by Guatemala, and the exact border between Belize and Guatemala is still in dispute. A small garrison of British troops was left in Belize to give support against Guatemala. It's a curious little country, Belize, an anomaly in the Spanish colonial world of Central America. This small ferry over a river in the Cayo district takes people over to Spanish Lookout, one of several Mennonite communities in Belize. This ferry, one of several in Belize, is the ultimate green machine, in that it uses no hydrocarbon fuels or other polluting agents, and its energy source is entirely renewable. This Mennonite community of Spanish Lookout is enormous in area, and it's very fertile. The Mennonites migrated through Eastern Europe to southern Russia, from where they emigrated to the New World. In the mid-20th century, some Mennonites made an agreement with the government of British Honduras to take over several tracts of unused land, and founded these thriving agricultural communities which now supply a very high proportion of the produce, meat, poultry, eggs, cheese, and butter and other necessities. They're very successful, yet the people retain their traditional way of life. Many still travel in horse-drawn buggies, and they are readily recognizable by their simple, handmade, though not stylish clothes. This land tortoise, who, judging by his size, must have been about 20 years old, took a long time to decide whether he'd climb the bank or not. He did in the end. Belize has the reputation of being one of the most environmentally conscious countries in the world, and there are many and various laws designed to protect the environment and wildlife. We saw more varieties of birds here than any other country we visited in Central America. It has vast tropical rainforests teeming with wildlife. There is a Caribbean coastline of over 200 miles with a wonderful 170 miles long tropical barrier reef, the second largest in the world after the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. Tourism is thriving in Belize. Tours catering to all kinds of ecotourists abound, particularly catering to bird watchers and scuba divers. And yet, tourism, including ecotourism, is both a leading foreign currency producer and also the chief threat to the environment. There does not seem to be the political will to prevent the sale of coastal land and small offshore keys and islands to foreign investors who are destroying the coastline with resorts and condominium developments. 20 miles south of the coastal resort town of Placencia, a charming place rapidly being spoiled by overdevelopment, lies the mouth of the Monkey River, which can be reached by a rapid speedboat trip from Placencia. At the river's entrance lies the tiny village grandly called Monkey River Town. Founded in 1891, Monkey River Town was once a thriving community of several thousand loggers, banana farmers and fishermen. Now the sleepy village boasts about 150 people who make a living from ecotourism on the Monkey River. Monkey River arises in the Mayan hills in the interior, and it's one of the major river systems of Belize. This charming ecotourist guide spent a whole day with us on his boat, pointing out all manner of animals and plants that abound along the banks of the river. He pointed out one large bird which looked suspiciously like an oriole and called it, with definite tongue-in-cheek, a Montezuma revengia. He was a fount of knowledge, though, about the ecology of the region, and was delightful company all day. By the end of the 19th century, there were extensive banana plantations along the course of the Monkey River, and thousands of banana plantation workers lived along its banks. But a major blight almost wiped out completely the bananas by the middle of the 20th century. As if that were not enough, the massive hurricane Iris made landfall near Monkey River in 2001 and further devastated the town and the area. There were many and various of these colourful land crabs scurrying along the banks of the river. There were butterflies of all colours of the rainbow, and some heavily camouflaged ones, like this shy fellow. Soon we came towards our first troop of howler monkeys. These monkeys are amongst the biggest of the New World species, and, quite frankly, only a mother could love them. They have an intense look of extreme anxiety and gloom at all times, and I suppose if I looked like that, I'd feel the same way too. They have enormous prehensile tails from which they can suspend their whole weight, and they live their entire lives in the trees. They are the loudest of all land animals, and, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, they can be heard up to 20 miles away. Their noisy howling and growling is said to be part of a system of inter-troop spacing and territory protection, as well as, possibly, mate guarding. To the Mayans of certain cities, notably Copan, howler monkeys assumed special, almost godlike status, and were depicted as such in many representations. There were insects of all kinds along the river, like this enormous spider. There were beetles and giant ants, and exotic-looking flies and moths. Because the river was so muddy, one could not see below its surface, but our guide told us that the river teemed with fish, large and small. We came upon this huge boa constrictor snake, snoozing away in the daytime sunshine before going to hunt his dinner at nightfall. There were many of these beautiful iguanas of mixed colourful patterns. This one, cleverly, has the green leaf pattern on his belly, which camouflages him perfectly against his background. Along the river we glided. As we approached, the elusive, shy crocodiles slid off the mudbanks into the deep, muddy water. Everything seemed heavy and sleepy in the hot midday air. Everywhere one could see the evidence of past prosperity, with remnants of dwellings and piers and docks, now all crumbling and being engulfed by the voracious jungle. It was sad to think of these generations of people who had lived and, it is said, thrived here along the banks of the Monkey River. Thousands of lumbermen who unfortunately exhausted the supplies of mahogany wood, and many more banana plantation workers who saw their plants slowly wither and die. All those dead hopes and dreams lay along the banks of the Monkey River, and although ecotourism might be more sustainable, it's certainly not as lucrative. Maybe there's a lesson there for all of us in the future. This tree near Monkey River town had roots like a system of flying buttresses, perhaps to stop it falling down in high winds. We got our first glimpse of the 1,000 years dead Mayan civilization here in the visitor center at the ruins of Caracol. It's useful to get these artists' impressions of how the buildings and the people must have appeared in their heyday. This then makes it easier to interpret what one sees when one steps out onto the actual archaeological sites. There is a beautiful large-scale model of the site here which gives a fine overview of the layout of this extensive site. Caracol is one of the more easily accessed of the Mayan sites, being about a 20-minute walk or 5-minute drive from the outskirts of San Ignacio, a town in the mountains of the Cayo district of Belize. One of the temple buildings has a magnificent view over the surrounding Belize River Valley. Caracol, when translated, has the unpropitious name of the place of the ticks, but happily we did not see or entertain or feed any of these creatures on the day we were there. Caracol is not one of the larger Mayan sites. It was the royal palace and acropolis of an elite ruling family, and it was continuously occupied for nearly 2,000 years, from 1000 BC to about 800 AD. In this place of the ticks, there were built, over the course of 2,000 years, 34 classical period Mayan structures built around 7 plazas, 1 large altar, and 2 ball courts. The ball court was an important feature of Mayan communities, and the games played there were many and various, some with teams of players and others with individuals playing against a single other person. Sometimes the ball was thrown and sometimes it was struck using the player's hip or belly, but always the games were vigorously fought and large crowds watched and applauded. Often the games were played as part of a religious ritual. Not infrequently in Mayan history, the ball games were also associated with human sacrifice. Yes, the players played with particular energy and intensity when it was known that the loser or losers would become sacrifices to the gods. Human sacrifice was very much part of the Mayan culture, though perhaps not quite so much as the later Aztecs of further north in Mexico. It was believed that one way to please or appease the gods was to sacrifice one or more people on specially constructed convex-shaped altars. The victim was stripped, painted blue, and placed face up on the altar, held down by the arms and legs by priest assistants to the chief priest. This priest, using a sharp obsidian knife, would then quickly incise the belly just below the rib cage and cut out the still beating heart, which was then held aloft for the people to see. On other occasions, the victim would be decapitated or perhaps flayed alive, particularly nasty that one, or thrown from a high part of the temple or into a pit kept specially for the purpose. Wars against other neighboring city-states would often be conducted simply to capture prisoners to be used as human sacrifices to the gods. I suppose it was felt that it was better to sacrifice your neighbors than to face the possibility yourself. Men, women, and even children were killed. Sometimes these prisoners were given another fighting chance by playing against them in a ball game to entertain the masses, the losers being led away to be sacrificed to the gods. This practice must have concentrated the mind wonderfully when fighting a war or playing in a ball game. Lower caste prisoners would often be used as slaves or concubines, but more important prisoners, such as high officials or even rulers, were much more prized, and these were the ones selected for sacrifice. I suppose that to watch an important enemy playing a ball game for his life must have been particularly entertaining. This interesting bauble was said by our guide to be a priceless artifact dating from ancient times, which could be acquired for a small sum at a great loss to the seller. We said we'd think about it for a while. From here at Caracol, we drove along a dusty, bumpy, rocky road, past the elegant resort owned by the movie director Francis Ford Coppola, to the major Mayan site of Caracol. It's called Caracol because the archaeologists who first arrived here 60 years ago found large numbers of snails here. Caracol is derived from the Spanish word for snail. The history of central and southern Belize during the Mayan civilization was centered upon this city-state of Caracol. At the height of its power, it extended over 200 square kilometers and had a population of 150,000 people. It was ruled by a powerful king. This was the most impressive building in Caracol, Ka'ana, meaning sky place. At 143 feet high, it was, and remains, the tallest man-made structure in Belize. Caracol's royal dynasty arose in the year 331 AD, and the city rose to great power in the next 2 centuries. So, just as Caracol's power and sophistication was growing, on the other side of the world, the power of the Roman Empire was slipping away. In the year 562 AD, Caracol defeated in battle its Mayan rival Tikal, only 47 miles away in what is now Guatemala. Lord Khan, the king of Caracol, soundly defeated Lord Doublebird, the king of Tikal. King Doublebird was captured and brought to Caracol. Here he was ritually sacrificed. It's not recorded whether he was given the option of playing a ball game for his life before he paid the supreme sacrifice. After its great victory over Tikal, Caracol experienced a great boost in power and wealth, which lasted for 2 or 3 centuries. After that, its population slowly dwindled, and the city was totally abandoned by the year 1050. Why it was abandoned is not known for certain. What is known is that all of the great Mayan city-states died out at roughly the same time in history, so there must have been a common factor linking the demise of all these scattered communities. The most likely scenario is that they all simply outgrew their resources. Caracol, at the height of its power, had about 150,000 people. Their agricultural practices were relatively primitive, with the slash-and-burn method being most common. There was no fertilization, of course, and no regular rotation of crops, so that eventually the land was exhausted. Perhaps over time famine set in, and the people had to abandon their communities and scatter to find a better livelihood elsewhere. In this way, the Mayan people spread throughout what is now Central America. They interbred with other communities and, several centuries later, with the Spanish conquistadores, and now they are part of the mestizos people of Central America. An exploring logger first rediscovered this site in 1938, and the archaeologists arrived in 1952, but major excavation work didn't begin until 1985. The on-site museum and interpretive center was opened in 1998, and major excavations continue to this day. So far, archaeologists have uncovered 3 main plazas and 2 ball courts surrounded by pyramid temples and other structures. Over 100 tombs have also been discovered with their contents, together with a rich collection of hieroglyphic inscriptions and friezes revealing the history of this long abandoned city-state. We wandered around this extraordinary Mayan gem almost entirely alone. I suppose that the long, bumpy ride deters a lot of tourists, but the place certainly rewards the discomfort endured. The emptiness and the silence, apart from the noise of the troops of howler monkeys in the surrounding jungle, make it possible to imagine the people in Caracol living their lives here in a period stretching over 2,000 years. This is a very special place. The Mayans were a very sophisticated society of people. Their knowledge of the natural world and of astronomy was immense. The calendars that they devised millennia ago were amazingly accurate, though it is only a contemporary urban myth that the Mayan calendar foretold the end of the world as we know it to be on the 21st of December 2012. Mayans had a very structured society, and everybody knew their place in it. As in other places and times in world history, powerful people, usually men, became monarchs. At the lower end of the social scale, the labourers and artisans and servants lived comfortably in their servile lives. The people were relatively healthy, ate good diets, and were content with their lot in life, unless you were suddenly plucked from obscurity to become a sacrifice to the gods. But however sophisticated and clever they were, their place in the sun was time-limited. They hadn't the knowledge or the foresight to see that what they were doing, or perhaps not doing, was leading to their inevitable demise. Perhaps that is a lesson for us in our own times.